Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Doug Rabow. Hey, Doug. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
And I have to apologize because yesterday I mistakenly said you were from the US, but you're not. You're from the bigger, not state, but country up north. That's Canada, of course.
Absolutely. I'm from Vancouver, but Vancouver, Canada, as there's also a Vancouver in the US.
So, Doug, today is Tuesday, of course. We talk about teams and how sometimes they create their own problems. But before we dive into that, do share with us, what was the book that most inspired you in your career as a Scrum Master?
Absolutely. So as we talked a little bit in the Monday episode, a big part of my journey was just going down the road of strategic management. Read a lot of books around that, and the one that absolutely stands out above everything else, not specific to being a Scrum Master, but would be The Toyota Way. So all about lean management. The really important thing that I would say right off the beginning with that one is that it is not a book on manufacturing. For me, when we talk about lean, there's kind of two distinct parts to it. One is lean strategic management, which is what the Toyota Way is about. It can be applied to absolutely any company that delivers a product or service. And then we have the Toyota production system that we have to be a little bit more careful with pulling ideas out of. That is very manufacturing focused for sure. But just the ideas in the Toyota Way in terms of how we build organizations, how we get feedback from our teams, there's so much value, and there's even so many direct parallels. One of the things that always stand out to me is they talk about, this is from a manufacturing perspective, but direct parallel to what we do in IT, was just the value of releasing in small batches of high quality. So when we look back to the story of the Toyota Way, the story is that the North American manufacturers were focused on cost per part, doing these huge production runs to try to drive cost per part down. But then you'd end up with large amount of defects that you wouldn't find until after the fact when you actually went to put the car together. Whereas Toyota, on the other hand, actually invented something called SMED, single minute exchange of dies, was revolutionary. They took an impossible problem and just said, we're going to find a way to solve this.
And they did.
They absolutely did. And they started releasing small batches of high quality parts that allowed them to pivot as needed, to catch defects very early on. It is a direct parallel between what we see out of big release project style planning and the short iterative planning we see working in sprints or even just in a Kanban method as well. So lots of direct parallels. I think it's just anybody who's interested in strategic management, it's definitely at the top of my list.
Yeah, Toyota Way is a great book. I still remember reading it and dog-earing it and underlining and taking notes in the margins. It's a book that shaped my thinking about process improvement. Also product development, but rather in the process of development, not the product itself. Like Lean Startup, for example, is a lot more focused on the product itself, not so much on the process. And one of the things that I remember from that book is that Jeffrey Liker talks about Toyota as being a socio-technical system. And I really like that idea because what he basically implies is that you need to take into account people and technology. It's not about the process and the technology, it's about people and technology. And the process is there, just like management is, to support the people developing the technology. And there's great examples there also from a lean startup perspective, how they look at product development from a product perspective as well. I think it's a wonderful book and filled with ideas that we are barely still exploring in the Agile realm as of today. That's 2014 as we speak. So 2024, pardon me, as we speak. So a lot of ideas in that book that are still coming up through the Agile communities worldwide. So that's definitely a great recommendation.
I absolutely agree with what you've said. For me, the Toyota Way is more about how we manage an organization of people at scale. And that's really why it's so applicable to literally any sort of company that develops a product or service. And the other thing that you touched on that is also near and dear to my heart is just this value chain perspective. If we look at the fact that, ultimately it is the people actually doing the work who are the ones creating the value, what that means is that everybody else in the company, all the managers, any sort of architectures or engineers, anything like that, their job is to help support the people doing the work be as productive as they possibly can. And what's possible once we take that view just opens all sorts of new doors. So absolutely.
Yeah. And the single minute exchange of dies, which is quite a mind-boggling change in that industry, that is car manufacturing, is only one of the many mind-boggling process development ideas that came through the years from the TPS or Toyota Production System, not the least of which, one, led to the creation of a specific Agile method, the Kanban method. It's not, Kanban method doesn't come straight from Toyota, but a lot of the ideas that are in the Kanban method came from the Toyota Production System. So there's a lot of pedigree in the Agile methodologies that comes from the TPS or Toyota Production System. And one of the things they pay a lot of attention to is teams. They even have cell manufacturing, which is a team-centric manufacturing process, for example. And of course, we as Scrum Masters also focus a lot of our attention in the team. So we're going to explore the story of a team and how sometimes they can create their own challenges. So Doug, take us through that story of how a team over time kind of develop this way of acting, this behaviors or patterns that maybe started small, but eventually created a big problem for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can certainly talk to my current experience, and there's only a handful of things that I think are truly important at the end of the day. For me, like the big three things, if we wanted to summarize our Agile approach in a nutshell, it's that we're breaking our work down into small pieces, that we're always working on the most important thing next, and that we can show our customer we're working towards something of value. So one of the things that I experienced working with a new team, and I would say this should apply to all teams, is that you come in and you look at the backlog, whatever tool that you're using, and you go, okay, what's our next priority? Where do I look? I'm brand new to this team. Where would I look in the backlog to see, what is our next biggest priority or our next top priority? And there, I think there's often not an answer to that question. It seems like a really, really simple thing, but just being organized in our backlog, breaking things down if you're using epics or whatever sort of containerized grouping that you're using, working with the team. I always try to coach teams, let's try to break our epics down into something that's like a 1 to 5 week body of work that we can complete and mark done and have it be a unit of value delivered to our customer. And so for me, that was one of the really big first steps. Are we organized? Have we categorized things properly? We really should leverage our visual management tools. So when you get into, if you're working in Sprint or Kanban, when you're actually using our board, just simple things like that, we're updating statuses, that we're, if it is individuals, if we're not fortunate enough to work in a mob programming environment where people are working on their own, that those tickets are getting updated to who they're actually with at this time. Funny, there is a lean parallel there as well. We can actually look to our 5S for guidance on this. So see if I can remember this off the top of my head. I think I can. Sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. So we can actually use that as kind of a guiding light for what we need to accomplish in the tool. For me, that's the first big thing. Just being organized, making sure we're always working on the most important thing next. Just sets the team up for success down the road. And I think in a lot of cases, that might be the first thing that you experience coming in as a Scrum Master. Certainly was in my case. Joined a team and we couldn't point where in the backlog the next biggest priority was. So what I did working with that team, again,
what did that conversation look like? So you come in and you ask, so what's the next most important thing for us to work on? And the team just looks at each other puzzled, or they point to something, but everyone points to something different. How did that conversation look like?
So the way that conversation actually happened in real life is the product owner actually asked, why this isn't the next, we ended up in a sprint where we were working on something. They're going, why are we working on this? This isn't the next priority we should be working on. And my response to that was, well, where would I look in the backlog to know what the next priority should be? Obviously, this was very early on. This was in the first or second sprint working with the team. So from there, what we've done was we actually developed a workflow working with the team. So we did some pretty non-standard things, just the nature of our work. We are actually working out of multiple different epics at the same time. So what we did was we created some sprint placeholders that we actually used as placeholder buckets. So the way we were able to fix that is we now have a ready for refinement bucket, where the product owner is responsible for going in, making sure prior to our refinement meeting that everything is prioritized from top to bottom. The thing that I'll encourage people, and just makes things simple, at the end of the day, it's just a list. Turn everything into a list, put the most important thing at the top, the second most important thing directly below it. So we have a process now where the product owner will prioritize everything within that bucket. When we get to our refinement meeting, we go through, we put everything in refinement, we go, yep, this meets a definition of ready that allows us to move this forward. Basically, it's just the developer giving a thumbs up that, yep, they have the information that they need to be able to move to the next stage, at which point we'll move it into another sprint placeholder bucket that just says ready for development. And that way, once we get to sprint planning, all of the work has already been through refinement. Only takes 15 minutes. We can go through and pull stuff into sprint planning. So hugely important in terms of...
And I think this is one aspect that gets very often forgotten, and many people, including Scrum Masters, can be sometimes bored or annoyed by the process. And one thing that I wanted to say is that you talked about use visual management tools. And one of the things that I wanted to say relate to that is, if you can't see it, you can't manage it, period. And this is one of the things that I find the hardest to convey to people. Management teams, other Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, a lot of people seem to think that if they know something, everybody else knows that something. And if there's one thing I've learned from working in this industry for, well, nearly 30 years now, is that if you know something, but it is not written or visible anywhere that everybody goes to daily, then only you know something. Nobody else knows that. And this is so simple. This is why the whole Kanban method, and I should say Kanban approach technique, was developed at Toyota, and later on, of course, also taken into the Kanban method, which is that all work must be visible, and every Kanban, which is visual card, Kanban comes from that word of postcard, visual card. If it is not visible, it cannot be managed. And there's so complicated processes at Toyota and other places that are managed by just this very simple idea of having work move somewhere as a visual item. And we try to make work so complex and manage it in such a complex process just to avoid visualizing things. Not to mention the fact that because that process becomes so complex, we stop updating the tracking cards or links or notes or whatever it is that we might be using. And that just destroys the whole possibility of us managing the work in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. So the more complex and more chaotic your environment, the more you're actually going to benefit from doing that. You just lose track of stuff. There's too many things going on, and that, to your point, that is where the visual management is so helpful. Is it maintains that everybody has the same level of awareness of what's being worked on, and allows
or even any awareness. Let's not forget that it may be just any awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Just seeing it on the board, knowing it's something that we need to be working on, taking your backlog, making sure your backlog is organized. It's amazing how doing just some of these simple things right can literally, if you're in a place where the volume is turned up to 12 out of 10, just getting organized and making sure everybody has clear priorities. And I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, that we're always working on the most important thing next. I think from an Agile perspective, it's just such a valuable idea. We make sure that we're always working on whatever we think the most important thing is next for our customer. It's really hard to ever get things too wrong. So
yeah. And another thing you said that is very important: keep your backlog organized, which is for me short and simple. And this is another thing that doesn't get enough attention in our community, because we develop these overly long, super detailed backlogs that nobody looks at. And then, of course, we complain that, oh, this wasn't done. When was it added to the backlog? Well, maybe 5 years ago. This is true. This is a true story. Somebody told me they had removed an item from the backlog that was 5 years old. And I was like, yeah, if it's 5 years old, it's probably never going to get done. In fact, if it's 5 months old, it's probably never going to get done.
Well, and one of the most simple things that absolutely comes to us from Lean, but is just kind of a relatively straightforward idea, is just to take your problems and break them down into smaller pieces. So whether we're talking about, if you have that huge backlog, break it down into epics that can be accomplished in 3, 4, 5 weeks. Something that can be delivered and marked done is hugely valuable. Remember that the visual management tools that we work in, at the end of the day, all of this is just a list that exists in a database. All we have to do, I don't care if you're 500 people, if you're 1,000 people, you take that list, you start categorizing things, you start updating things with statuses and breaking things down into smaller pieces. Things go from where do we even start to, oh, this is actually simple and there's specific problems that we can start moving forward and solving for right away. It can be a night and day difference, and something I've had huge success with. So
absolutely. Well said. And thank you for sharing, Doug.
More than happy to.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.